wasn't a conscious search to find my own inner voice, but I discovered years later that every book I read, every course I took were teaching me exactly that. And so it's only recently that I put it all together, and that is the program I'm now teaching is like, oh my gosh, everything I have ever learned really has taught me to trust my inner compass. And so I
Right.
now call the inner compass coach. But
Hello, my dear friends. I'm Donald Lee, and this is Expressing and Revealing Your Truth with Donald Lee. It's a podcast in which I help you understand the truth about who you really are and how you can express and reveal that truth in the world. To do that, I interview people who have had transformational spiritual experiences, the type of experiences that many of us wish we had but never do. Yet, by learning from my guests' experiences and the wisdom they've gained from those experiences, all of us can glimpse a bigger vision of who we really are and how we can live our lives more fully, more peacefully, more lovingly. Be sure to download my free mini ebook containing 5 of the 50 parables from my popular book, The Band Director's Lessons About Life. These little parables are short, easy to read, inspiring, and also help you to understand more about who you really are. There's a link in the show notes to get your free ebook. In this episode, I interviewed Dr.Toni LaMotta. She has had a series of important spiritual events and turning points in her life, although none as dramatic as most of my guests. Her spiritual unfoldment has been more like the rest of us, slow, sometimes unsteady development. Ever since she was a little girl, Toni had a sense of the love of God within her and flowing through her. She just wanted to share her love with the whole world and make everybody understand that we're just love. Toni entered a convent after high school and loved that life for many years. But after a while, she found Catholic doctrine and rules to be too limiting for her. In this wonderful conversation, Toni outlines the twists and turns of her spiritual life and development, bringing her to the place where she is today and the spiritual teaching she does today. I'm sure you will enjoy this great conversation with Dr. Toni LaMotta. Hello, my dear friends. We have here today a fascinating guest, Dr. the PhD, Dr. Toni LaMotta. Another beautiful Italian name, right? Italian, Toni?
that's right.
And Antonietta probably is the full name or something like that. How do you say that in Italian?
Well, I was born Antoinette, but I legally changed it because no one ever called me that. So I've been Toni since the day I was born.
Yeah, we sometimes we give our kids long names, but then we're so lazy with our speech that nobody uses anything longer than 2 syllables, right? If it's a 3-syllable name or more, it's going to get shortened to something,
Well,
or it's going to.
computers constantly truncated it. I mean, when I was in
Really?
grade school, yeah, they made me write out my whole name, and when you put it on a form, there were never enough spaces for my whole name.
Oh,
So it was very challenging as a child, especially when you were learning to write and everybody was writing their Anne and John and, Antoinette.
yeah. Did everybody finish their forms, children? No, I'm still working on my name, right? At least it wasn't Rumpelstiltskin or something like that. Okay, so Toni, we want to hear about your story of spiritual awakening, which was more gradual, but you had some significant turning points as well. So let's jump in. Let's hear your story of spiritual awakening.
Well, I have a long life, so I'll try to keep it brief.
Hey, tell me about it. Look at this white hair, huh?
Mine just isn't white yet. It's got very little. But anyway, I remember, and I don't know if this is something I conjured up or if it really happened, but I remember being like about 5 years old, and I lived in New York. And I remember looking up at the Empire State Building and wishing I could stand on top of it and preach to the world and tell them how loved they were, where that
That's
came from.
beautiful.
At 5, I think my first mystical experience, but it was, I sensed from an early age that I had lots of gifts and I was loved and, I wanted everybody to have that experience. And
That sounds like the Spirit of God already working through you. Even as a little child, you were open to that.
Yeah, I think so in some level, and because I felt such love, and I'll skip through all the grade school and high school and get right to at the age of 17, I entered a convent. Now, and the reason I did that was, well, I can look in retrospect, the reason. At the time, I knew I was called to priesthood. I mean, it was so clear to me, and obviously, the rest of the church has not caught up with that yet, but and I don't know if they ever will. However, I did what the church would allow a woman to do and entered a convent. Later, I looked at, we talked about an Italian background. Men used to say, when I say jump, you say how high on the way up. And so I think early on I was like, nah, I'm not going to get married. That's for sure. So
Not with the kind of fairly rigid expectations within the traditional Italian marriage.
yeah, exactly. So I didn't see anything that I wanted. I think I was a freedom lover from the get-go and just knew that that was, woman's lib before it became woman's lib. But I just knew that it wasn't the right path for me. But I didn't know that entering. I think I was holy and wanting to lead a dedicated life. And I remember my parents cried. They thought it was terrible. But I remember saying, I've been given so much, I need to be given back, which was
Right.
interesting to know at an early age. And so I went on immediately after I graduated from college. They sent me back to teach in the high school that I had graduated from, which is a very interesting experience living with my former teachers now as, a housemate. And I think during that time, I really loved the prayer life, the discipline, all of that.
Right.
I can't look back on those years and say, they were terrible. There were a couple of challenging things, but for the most part, I really think I learned to communicate with God because we were in
Yes.
silence so much of the time that I learned how to pray. And
Yeah.
it was probably a very immature way of praying at the time, but it was, it was a little it's interesting because years later, I think I came back to that childlike prayer that I kind of let go of after a while. But it was a very intimate, personal relationship. I understood, what, and that's what they call a mystic, anybody who experiences God. And I clearly did.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so,
And it's what all of us are meant to do, right? All of us are meant to not simply understand this stuff intellectually, which is my great failing, but to actually experience God. And that's why this podcast is about spiritual experiences. Yeah. That it's
yeah,
beautiful to have that actually in at a time in your life when you're really still developing.
yeah, it was very special. And then it compounded because I went off and I started visiting a house of prayer. And it was a charismatic place, and I then got involved in the charismatic renewal in the Catholic Church. And
Right.
for those who may not know what that is, it's where people speak in tongues and give prophecies, and it was an amazing time of my life. I was in my early 20s, and I then went to live in that house of prayer after having, profound experience. The baptism in the spirit, if you will, was one of the major turning points in my life. It suddenly, everything I had been reading in scripture came alive. I mean, all the things that you read about in books, it really happened.
Yeah.
And I had so many profound experiences. When I lived in the house of prayer, I started writing music. I would pick up a guitar and write songs that were extraordinary. I mean, it was just, they came through me. And then I was put on a preaching team. We went around to different churches teaching and helping people be baptized in the Spirit, if you will. But I got to speak about God's love, which was, my early experience. And excuse me, I think that's where I got my desire to be on stage. I loved speaking, and I had probably one of the most profound experiences during that time. I spoke at a church in Spring Lake, New Jersey. The congregation was mostly men, which is unusual.
Yes.
And at the end of it, I was back in the 60s. I had my hair parted down the middle, looking like Joan Baez, and with my little guitar. Anyway, at the end of it, they looked at me and said, "How old are you?" I was like, I knew. And the priest who was in charge of the group just touched me when I came off the platform and said, "God really had you tonight." And what happened, Donald, was extraordinary. That group of men were predominantly part of AA. I had heard of AA, I knew nothing about it, and they told me that my talk was a direct outline of the 12 steps of AA.
Right. Yeah, I'm not
So,
surprised.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
channeled once again. It was through me, and, that's why they said, "And how old are you?" And, I knew. And to this day, that remains one of my most profound connections. When I was on that platform, something took over, and it
Right.
was, and I had prepared the talk ahead of time. It wasn't like, words came out of nowhere. And I've discovered that spirit can speak through preparation. And many people always say you should just go up without any notes. And like, no, for me, spirit works when I'm writing my notes.
Yes, yeah. Actually, it does for everyone. It does for as I've done a lot of public speaking too, and yeah, it goes much better. I mean, it goes better the more prepared you are,
Yeah, it
and
really it
yeah,
always surprised me that some of the big name speakers would get up and they would ramble all over the place, and I'm like,
yeah,
"Yeah, yes." Anyway, that's how I knew that I wanted to be a professional speaker, and I did become that for a while, but when I eventually left the convent, and that's a whole other story, which we don't need to get into at the moment, except for the fact that one of the things I learned was that I had given up my own inner knowing. In the
right,
convent, you take vows, and one of the vows was the vow of obedience. I don't think it meant to be this, but I interpreted this as not trusting yourself, listening to anybody else telling you what to do because you don't know. And I don't really think that that's the true essence of the vow of obedience, but we'll leave that for now. When
right,
I left, I began kind of like unconsciously. It wasn't a conscious search to find my own inner voice, but I discovered years later that every book I read, every course I took were teaching me exactly that. And so it's only recently that I put it all together. And that is the program I'm now teaching is like, oh my gosh, everything I have ever learned really has taught me to trust my inner compass. And so I
right,
now call the inner compass coach. But
yeah.
examples, let me give you a couple of examples. One of the first
Because I
ones,
mean, if I could
sure,
maybe be presumptuous here, I mean, our inner compass is the Holy Spirit.
absolutely.
It is God. Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's not presumption at all. It's totally what I believe. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make a segue here because one of the lessons that I've learned later on that was very helpful is that there are three faces of God. The God that's infinite, the God we cannot name, is the one we talk about. So we talk about God, we talk to God, the God beside us, you will. The God beyond us, the God beside us, and the God within us. And almost every church teaches one or two, not all three. And we'll talk a little bit about my journey into New Thought, but in the New Thought churches, you never talk to God, to God. You talk either about God or as God. And so it was kind of a revelation that came later in my life that said, wait a minute, all that talking to God, that's important too. And
Yeah.
so now I see all three of them. Anyway, that's a segue. I tend to jump. One of the things then, when I left, I'm just trying to think of where we were.
Well,
Charismatic.
you were doing a lot of public speaking as part of the charismatic renewal within the Catholic Church,
And then
which
I
also, I mean, not surprisingly, whenever you do something, there's gonna be critics, and the charismatic movement within the Catholic Church definitely had vocal critics within the church also.
yeah, but it was a profound experience, except
Yeah,
I'll give you
yeah,
one moment. I remember being at a conference in Notre Dame with thousands of people praying in tongues. It was incredible experience. And I remember feeling so caught up that I asked the question, is this me or am I just caught up with this crowd? And it was quite interesting. And you and I have talked earlier about the integral theory. And when I studied the stages of integral development, one of the things they say, one day you'll wake up and ask the question, is this me or am I just following? And I mean, I remember the moment I was standing in a crowd of people praying and singing in tongues and asking that question. And the answer, by the way, was partly was me and partly was being caught up. It was,
The classic non-committal answer. Yeah, right.
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
yes and no.
It was a little bit of both. It was, well, I started saying that when I left, I started studying things. And one of the people that I worked with was a man named Ira Progoff. You familiar with the intensive journal? No.
That doesn't
Okay.
sound familiar to me.
Very briefly, Ira was a psychotherapist who studied with Carl Jung and then eventually created a system of journal keeping, but in such a way that there are almost like 15 different techniques. It's not just recording what happened during the day. You dialogue with your past, you look at dreams, you look at dialoguing with people or events, and you look at them from different angles. Powerful, powerful method. And I studied with Ira for quite a while and eventually kind of made my own version of it. And it's part of what I still teach. But the intensive journal had a profound effect because there were all these different aspects of my life that felt like they were jumping from one thing to another. But in the journal, they all came together. And it was a feeling of, wow, these themes are like perennial for me. It's very interesting. And so that was profound. Another amazing teacher was Sonia Choquette. You familiar with her?
No.
Okay, I'm going to introduce you to all these things, but
Good. Thank you.
you'd love Sonia. Sonia Choquette is probably the leading intuitive of our time.
Really?
She is amazing. She was a psychic intuitive from the time she was a small child. Her mother had the gift and she learned and studied. She is the most down to earth intuitive I have ever met. I studied with her, took 13 different courses from her. When I study, I study. And she really taught me all about spirit guides and, from a Catholic upbringing, that was a no-no. So
Right.
talk about another transformation. I got to experience, and one of the things I'll share it with your audience right now because one of the most helpful things that I first learned from her is that if you want to hear the voice of spirit, notice that you have two voices speaking in you and name them. And she called one of them your barking dog.
Okay. Yes.
I love it. The barking dog says, why are you doing this? What's going to happen? Watch out. This might not work. All that stuff. It's
Right.
loud, it's boisterous, it's frightening, and it's not God.
Right.
And the spirit's voice sometimes tells you what you don't want to hear, but it does it in such a loving way that you can listen. So I love it. And she literally says, name them both. And the first practice I teach everybody is just become aware what voice is now speaking. I've since added a third voice, and it's the voice of society, your school, your parents, what has told you, you ought to be a good girl or you better not
Yeah.
ruffle, all those other messages sometimes come through. But so that was another, I mean, those are two of the teachings. I can go on. I have several people that I studied with that, I'm a real student. If somebody ever just paid me to study, I'd spend my whole life just doing that. But I always study in order to teach so that
Yes.
whatever I have learned, I then share. And
Yeah.
that's when I really learn it, when I begin to share it. So I
Yes.
don't know if you want to stop me because I can go on a roll here.
Just a little break from the program to mention a couple of things. Firstly, if you're enjoying this podcast, please like, subscribe, and leave a short comment. It really helps with the algorithm to find more people who would enjoy these interviews. Also, if you're interested in spiritual growth, you might be interested in my series of spiritual books. As a spiritual author and a former band director, I use my little the band director trademark in these books because I use music as a metaphor for life and the journey of becoming a musician as a metaphor for our spiritual journey. There are three books in this series. The Band Director's Lessons About Life is a book of modern day parables inspired by events from my teaching career. When you're working with kids, things naturally come up that we sometimes call teachable moments. Little events where you realize there's a bigger lesson happening right now than the alternate F sharp fingering on the clarinet that I was trying to teach. I started writing some of these little stories down and turning them into modern day parables. So the band director's lessons about life has 50 little parables. It's a bit like a chicken soup for the soul book. Each parable is about 3 pages long. Each begins with a story that happened at school, and then there's a reflection section that draws a spiritual lesson out of the events of the story. That is, it explains what the spiritual metaphor means. The band director's lessons about life is easy to read, makes a great gift, and expresses many universal spiritual principles in an easy to understand way. If you want to go deeper in your spiritual growth, I've also published a study guide to accompany the book of parables. It turns the band director's lessons about life into a year-long course in spiritual development. You will spend a week on each of the 50 parables. There is a deeper teaching about the meaning of each parable, reflection and discussion questions, especially helpful if you would like to use the study guide in a group setting, and a different meditation for each lesson. The third book in this series is a little book titled The Band Director's Pocket Guide to Spiritual Growth. This little book explains a simple 3-step process for putting your spiritual growth into high gear. You might also be interested in my 2-book series about the craziness in our world today. The first book, What the Hell is Going On? The Web of Fraud That is Enslaving Everyone and How We Can Escape to Freedom, is still the best big picture expose of what's really going on behind all this craziness. It includes a spiritual perspective of what's happening, which most books leave out, but it also looks at the economics, the philosophy, the psychology, the history, etc., of the many trends that just don't make sense and are, in fact, elaborate frauds. The second book in this series focuses more on solutions to the mess we're in. It's The Way Forward, how to escape the totalitarian control of the New World Order and heal from its trauma. This book explains the 3 types of warfare we're being subjected to: spiritual warfare, psychological warfare, and 5th-generation warfare, and how we can sensibly respond on these 3 levels of body, mind, and spirit. You can learn more about all of my books at my website, www.cominghomespirit.com, because after all of us are on a spiritual journey back home to God. So that's cominghomespirit.com. You can also go directly to my Shopify page at cominghomespirit.myshopify.com, where you can purchase my books directly from me in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. I can now ship paperback books to the United States and Canada. If you're enjoying this podcast, I really think you'll enjoy my many books as well. Now, back to the program. Okay, well, so you did mention, Tony, that you came to realize that as much as there was a lot of things about the convent that you were in and the order that you were in, the path you were following, that there was a lot of things that you loved and that were very helpful to your own spiritual growth. It was also very constricting, and that I think is what led you to make a break with that. Do you want to talk about that? What led you to decide that you didn't want to continue on in that life?
It's interesting because for a while I was actually in therapy, and my therapist used to say to me, when you leave, and I would like, I'm not talking about that. I wouldn't even face it. I think it took almost 5 years before, I knew I should leave and when I actually did.
Right.
And then one day I remember walking in her office and saying, "When I leave," and she was like, "What? When did you make that decision?" So, to be honest with you, Donald, there was no one thing that says it's time to go, but it was an accumulation of things. But I have one memory when I looked back and said, like, what made you like know that you weren't listening to yourself? And I remember this one experience. There's something in the convent known as the grand silence. I mean, we were in silence most of the time, but the grand silence, I don't remember what hour of the night it was, pretty early. You couldn't not only not speak, you couldn't even look at another person. It was like one of the strictest rules. And one night I heard someone crying. Now, I was a sister of divine compassion. Everything in me
So
knew.
talk about being pulled in two directions. Hey, I'm a sister of divine compassion, but I can't look at you. I can't talk. Okay. Yeah. So which one of these
So you
is going
get
to
it.
win out? Yeah.
So I went over and I comforted her. I remember putting my arms around her, speaking to her, and it was, a holy moment. But the next morning, I remember waking up and went, "Oh my God, I didn't die. I broke a major rule and I didn't die." And it was a turning point for me to make me say, have I been listening to myself? And, or am I following? Again, it was one of those moments. Am I caught up because this is the right thing to do? Or am I listening to myself? And I don't know that I knew that at the time, but again, in retrospect, I just wrote a book and it was in writing the book that I said, what made me stop and say, and that experience jumped right up in my
Right.
memory and said, that was a turning point for me. It was one of those experiences that said, trust your heart. Don't
Yeah.
trust what the voice is telling you to do. Trust what you know is the right thing. And,
Right.
I'm grateful that I did. And it wasn't easy. I mean, leaving the convent, well, I was 33 years old when I left and missed the Beatles. I mean, you know, we
You
we
didn't get
weren't
to be one of
allowed
those
to,
screaming girls at the Beatles contest. Yeah, yeah.
we
Well,
weren't
you
allowed
probably didn't.
to,
You didn't really miss much. Yeah.
we couldn't listen to music or watch TV or anything. So when I first left, it was so challenging. I didn't know what to talk about to anybody.
Yeah.
I dated for a while and it was like so awkward. I dated all the wrong men. I mean, it was just quite an interesting experience, a challenging and a real like finding myself time. So
Yeah.
you're going to love it. When
Well,
I
I
was in
mean,
the
really,
convent,
Tony, what was happening is that you were having to adjust to a different culture. Even
total.
though you were living in the same city, it was a different culture that you had not experienced for those 16 or 17 years that you were in the convent, really.
Totally different. And one of the things, again, good girls, they needed math majors, so I became a math major. Never wanted a major in math. I wanted to be an English major, journalism. I was a writer. And anyway, long stories there, but I did what was needed. And so when I left, you'll love it, I became a computer programmer. Now,
Wow.
you know me all of 10 minutes, and you know that that's just not who I. I mean, talk about transformation. I think it was a lifetime of discovering, like, who am I really? Am I
Yes.
filling roles? And, that was a
Yeah.
role I filled, and I was a decent programmer. And then I left. I worked for AT&T, left them and went to a small company where I began training technical trainers how to teach. And and I came home. I mean, I really was a trainer of trainers is really where I belonged. So except that particular organization where, how do I describe it nicely? They were all into very male chauvinistic and very out there smoking pot every night and growing together. I just didn't fit the culture. It was
Yeah.
challenging for me to
Yeah.
say I got promoted very quickly, but they never let me get promoted to sales because only men could sell, so I was still
Mhm.
fighting some of that, and you
Yeah.
know what?
Well, it sounds like it's no wonder you got promoted quickly. You're the only one who is sober. All the
Yeah,
rest was
probably.
stoned.
The other thing though, and this is another course that I have since learned to teach, is like it's easy to put the blame on everybody else, and it was the atmosphere and the
Yeah,
situation. And I absolutely know I called that experience into my life
yeah.
and that I wasn't able to be in the sales position. I didn't think I was worthy. I didn't, all that stuff. Years later, I learned a wonderful shadow work and learned that you're never upset for the reason you think. And so, it's all about like what I was thinking at the time that caused that. I mean, life's very interesting if we could do it in retrospect, but the lessons didn't come till much later. But that is something that I teach all the time now too, how
Yeah,
to help people see it's not about fixing what's happening out there, about
right.
changing our belief system. And it's not about blaming ourselves. It's about noticing, for example, when I was in grade school, I was a bright little kid. I got great grades, and I brought home a report card once that had nothing less than a 98 on it. And my father looked at it and said, "So why isn't it 100?"
Oh,
And
wow.
Donald, I spent most of my life never thinking I was good enough. No matter
Yeah,
how hard I tried, it wasn't good enough. And it wasn't until I really did some deep shadow work that I saw that belief. My father
yeah,
never meant that. He was proud of me.
yeah,
It was just what he said as a joker at the time. Oh boy, did that change my life for a long time.
yeah.
Lots
It's
of
amazing, we often don't realize as parents how powerful our words are. I remember one time I was probably in grade 3 or 4 or something, struggling with my math homework, and it was frustrated. I think most people who study math, because you went on and did a lot of math at university, I did a lot of math at university. It was always hard, right? Math was always hard. It always took a lot of work and practice. It's a lot like music, actually. But I was mad as a little kid. I was mad and I was frustrated. My dad came over and helped me. And, I can't do this. I don't get it. And, he helped me with it. And I don't know exactly what the context of the conversation was at that point, but at one point he said, "Oh, you can you can do whatever you want to do in life." And bang, that went into my mind and it stayed there. I can do whatever I want to in life. Wow, I just got to put my mind to it. And that little comment of my father, I'm sure he forgot it very quickly after that, but I've remembered it my whole life. It's been very impactful on me. So sometimes these little things that either positive or negative that we say to our kids or our students, they can have an impact far beyond what we think they're going to be.
it's
And then on the
so
other hand, the things as a teacher or parent, oh, I'm going to impart some great words of wisdom, here, and nobody remembers any of it.
nobody remembers. It is amazing what, like, comes into us, and I'm so glad you brought up that very positive thing too, because all of our parents, well, the best of them and the worst of them, say good things as well as not so supportive things, and
Yeah,
without realizing it. We do it to one another all the time. Just a passing
yeah,
comment could change
and to
someone's life.
ourselves.
Yeah, and do it well, definitely to ourselves. So so there have been, talk about transformative experiences. I'm not sure I ever had a burning bush, but I have had so many instances. My friends call me the magic manifester. Like, feel something is being called. It shows up. It's so amazing to me. I'm just thinking of another example. I hope you don't mind my downloading as it comes to me here. But
It's okay.
I was in one of the first things that when I did leave the Catholic Church, I eventually found a Unity Church, and then from there went to a religious science, which is now called Centers for Spiritual Living.
Right.
And I was running a church in California, and it was a tiny church. It was in San Diego, but the suburbs of San Diego, real tiny group and wonderful. And I loved it. It was my first church. And I got an email one day about a church in Sarasota, Florida, which was the largest church in the movement at the time, or one of the largest churches. And I remember looking at that email and saying, that's my church. I need to be there. Now, I don't recommend this to anyone, but I went and put my house on the market and gave my resignation into my current church before I interviewed for the new job. I'm that sure. I mean, so talk about learning to trust your inner compass. I just
Right.
knew. When I want to make a decision nowadays, I always look to that. Do I have that kind of certainty? I was so certain that I actually got in some trouble from the people there because I have a lot of stories about that because I was telling everybody I'm moving to Sarasota, and other ministers heard me who had applied for that job, and they said, "How do you know you got it?" And I said, "Don't you?" And they went, "No." And I said, "Well, then good. It must be mine." You know, I did something similar not too long ago where, and this doesn't happen all the time, but I was living in an apartment. They call it a luxury apartment. It was a lovely apartment, and they sent us a notice that they were raising our rent by $200 a month. And I remember looking at that and saying, this is absurd. Why am I renting when with this kind of price I could buy something?
Right.
And I didn't have the down payment, Donald. There was no way I could have bought something. But I told my friends, I'm moving, I'm buying a condo. And I won't go through all the details, but here I am living in that condo right now because one magical thing after another started to happen. I was telling a friend, there's a man who I have never met, but is one of my best friends. He lives in Canada. We talk all the time. And I was telling him about this feeling that I was supposed to move. And he said, "You know what? Let me talk to my wife. We have a lot of equity in our house. I'll loan you the down payment. You're good for it." Now, I would never have asked anyone for that kind of money. And I got the down payment. I was able to move. It's just like one little miracle. And yes, I have paid him back. But it just is, to me, is when I listen to that voice that says, this is the way, walk it. I don't have any questions anymore. And that's really what I want to give to everybody else because it's such a wonderful way to live. It's like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And when I remember, I can do it at every moment. I don't always remember, but like
Yeah.
when I finish with you, what's the next thing I should be doing? Not should, I don't like the word should, but what's the next thing for me? And if I pay attention, it'll say, make that phone call, take a nap,
Right.
say, watch TV. I get the message and it
No,
just,
I disagree there. If it comes from God, God will never say watch TV.
oh, you and I have a different God.
I gave up I gave up watching TV over 30 years ago, and, yeah,
Really?
I don't miss it. Yeah, it's such a waste. I have other time wasters still in my life that I haven't managed to generate the discipline to control, but television is not one of them, hasn't been for many decades.
Well, you know what, Donald? I recently decided to stop calling it time wasted and calling it the ways I relax and have fun. And it's changed the way I think about it because I'm like, you're wasting time. Sometimes I just need to numb out. If I've been working at the computer doing things and I can watch a sitcom or some comedian, it's a way to renew myself. So I've
I
changed
get it.
what it means. I don't watch the news by any means ever, you know, but the rest of it, and that's somewhat recent actually, because I've been scolding my that barking dog's been saying, "You're wasting time." And so it's like, no, I'm taking time, which is very different,
Yeah,
you know.
I get it. I understand what you're saying exactly, Tony. But I do find that I am more drawn to because we do need that the renewal, the refreshment. And especially as I become older, I find that I don't always need more sleep, but I need more rest. And, I can't be just go active for 16 hours a day. I have to have some times where I sit down and read a book. And of course, when you're younger and you got a job
Right.
and a career and you got family and kids and stuff, there's no time for that. I mean, I went for probably decades when it was very difficult to read a book, a whole book. You could read an article or that sort of thing from time. But yeah, now that, I'm older, I don't have kids to look after or bother me and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, maybe read a book, go for a walk. I've always been close to nature. And in the last, well, maybe this decade, maybe 2 decades, I've really turned more to going for walks in the woods and being in nature as a way to both get some movement in my body and some fresh air and sunshine and just refresh, rejuvenate. So yeah, I would rather do that than
And
watch
watch
anything.
TV.
Yeah, or watch anything. Sometimes I need to get away from the books and the screen. I mean, as a writer and stuff, I spend most of my day in front of the computer screen, and I do need to get away from it more than I do. But I try to take every day some time out in the sunshine. When we're done here, I'm going to go take my son's dogs for a walk down the road and
Oh,
stuff.
that's good. And I'll probably go watch no, I won't watch TV tonight. I have a few other things.
So you've gone through you worked as a computer program, which wasn't really your ideal niche, and then you worked as a trainer. But we still have some other transitions to go through to get to the kind of thing you're doing today.
Oh, that's true. I guess I left you way back then. I went from there to start my own business, and I have become a serial entrepreneur ever since that. I started my own computer training business, training people in the software the company that I was with. I became a competitor of theirs, if you will,
Right.
just for their training part. Went that for a while, but then I discovered that I really didn't want to be teaching computers. My company was called Technical Training Institutes, and I train Technical Learning Institutes. It was TLI. And then I changed it to Total Learning Institutes and started teaching things like development and Myers-Briggs. And I became a professional traveler and speaker and did a bunch of those things. And then eventually it became the TLI remained. It was Toni LaMotta International. It was very, serendipitous. The same name, the same initials, the same logo applied to everything I did for the longest time. And I
Well,
worked
it's
with
just all your former customers that were confused.
I confused customers for a long time. When I learned the Enneagram, which is something that I really do a lot of now, I discovered why I jump from one thing to another because I'm what is known as an Enneagram 7, and the 7 is the freedom lover and the always searching for a new adventure.
Right.
So I was constantly changing what I was speaking of and what I was teaching. But I remained as a trainer, if you will. I remained as a teacher. And of course, then when I met New Thought, that was a little later on, I jumped in and became a minister. And even that was interesting. When I was in the Catholic Church, I actually got a Master's of Divinity degree from a Catholic seminary. I'm going to divert. I have to tell you a fun story. You're going to love this one. I was very fortunate. Many people who study theology get very rigid. The seminary that I went to was incredibly progressive. And the way I knew
So which
this
ceremony
was
was that?
it
Just out
was
of
called
curiosity.
Immaculate Conception Seminary in Mahwah, New Jersey. It is now
Okay.
part of Seton Hall in New Jersey. But one of the professors, my ethics professor, walked in the first day and he said, "If any of you are considering divorce, please don't do it. Murder your spouse." And he stopped and he said, "The Catholic Church forgives murder. We do not forgive divorce." That's how
What a great introduction to ethics. Hey, do we have a little ethical problem here maybe? Yeah, right.
it was. I knew I was in the right place. It was like blowing your mind right from day one. And it was a very powerful place. But that degree, I mean, I spent a number of years studying there and, remember the day the men were ordained, I cried my eyes out, but, I had the same degree, but I couldn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
But I went from there and I began teaching different things and began running different companies, um, trying to find my niche. And I would find it for a while and get excited about it and then change it again. And I went into a whole series on conscious aging as I started getting older. And, before I start, I must have read 15 books. And, it's like, and I have blogs. And I wrote a course on it, which I still teach. And it's part of like understanding your fears because aging and death are two of the greatest fears. So it fits with everything I'm doing now. But it, it was through that and I started seeing, I became New Thought minister and ran all these different churches for a while and eventually moved to Florida from when I got that church that I knew was mine and eventually
Sarasota.
left there and started another small church. You're going to love this. For a small time, I was on a floating chapel. We literally had a boat that went out every Sunday and took in tourists, and it held about 100 people. It was quite a large boat, and I would do a Sunday service on that boat every week. It was just delightful. So I've done lots of very different things that have changed me as I went along, and then
Wow.
eventually put together programs and started learning because of the computer. And this is a very important lesson. Nothing's ever wasted. Just
Yeah.
when we look at something in life, like why did I do that? The computer programming, now I am, believe it or not, 80 years old. Did I just say that out loud? But, and I'm so grateful that I have no fear of computers and
Right.
I can do software and programming that most people my age are terrified of or have
Right.
no idea. But where did that come from? It came from all those years working in computers that looked like they were wasted.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? They were not who I was, but there's a plan. Uh, there's something that happens. Nothing happens. I mentioned before, nothing happens by accident. I think there
Right.
is a divine scheme. I don't think it's predestined exactly, but there's some pattern that we live that when we allow ourselves to be open to life, it's amazing what happens. That's my lesson now is like not making anything happen, making it welcome. Very big.
That's a nice attitude. Yes. That's a nice, that really kind of makes you open to things, right? And it's actually the opposite of what fear does, right? Because fear closes us in and makes us not open to opportunity, not even see opportunities, right? We become very closed off when we fear, but that welcoming, it's just, oh, I wonder what neat things are going to happen today. Or every problem that comes up, wow, isn't that interesting? I wonder why I'm being presented with this.
Right. And even beyond that, I actually have asked the question, what's the gift here? Because
Yes.
there's a gift if you really look at it. Now, there's a new one though. About 6 months ago, I fell and broke my ankle in 4 places. Not
Ooh,
fun. I still have not quite figured out the gift in that one, Donald, but it made me step back. I guess maybe part of the gift is like I couldn't work the way I was doing it. I had to step back and say, what's important? What do I
yeah.
need? What can be done? I learned a lot about resting because I too.
Yeah. Sometimes, I've talked to many other people who have had illnesses and injuries and various things like that. And many people years later see in it, God telling them, you need to slow down. You need to slow down, take some time to rest and, look a little bit more carefully at what's going on and what's going on. So, yeah, maybe it's God telling us to slow down a little bit.
Yep. And I'm trying to listen.
Isn't that the way? Isn't that the way? Yeah. We like to pray, God, not my will, Lord, but thine be done. Except, I want this, this, this.
It is amazing. It is amazing, but it
Yeah.
is, you
Just make
know,
sure it's your will that I get this job in Sarasota, right?
well, at that point, I didn't even question it because I was
Yeah.
so clear. I never had to pray about it. I didn't pray about it. I just
Yeah.
knew. It was
Yeah.
just
It
that
came to
kind
you.
of radical knowing, and I wanna bottle that. If I could bottle that, but it
Well, can
and I
you
do remember the feeling of example speaking at that church, and that was one, leaving San Diego to come to Sarasota was another, moving to this condo. Those are like 3 major pivotal moments of my life that have changed
right,
me. They changed my identity as a result, and I think that's been key for me. The transformation has been I am a new person as a result of this. When I listen
r
and follow, that happens.
right, right. As far as kind of hearing that voice, you said that there's more than one voice, and what you called the barking dog, I think a lot of people nowadays in the spiritual community call that the ego, right? The spiritual ego. That's the loud voice. That's the my will, if we were to use the older way of talking of not the will of God, but my will. I want, right? Anything that starts with I, anything that's focused on me, that's the ego talking, right? What I want, what I like, all that kind of stuff. That's the ego talking. And it's the loud one, like you say, it's the barking dog. And listening to as the Bible says, right, that still small voice within. Now that's harder. To be honest, it's harder for us men even than it is for women. Women are just naturally more intuitive. Women are naturally more spiritual. They're more in touch with this. But for decades and decades, I would go to church and pray, God, show me what you want me to do. Show me the path of my life. Please guide me, all this kind of stuff. And nothing, nothing, right? And finally I got to saying, God, like, come on, I'm not getting your emails, man. Like I'm a thick-headed, linear thinking male. You got to make it clear to me, right? And you put your instructions in writing, man. And so this learning to listen to that still small voice within, this has been a lifelong struggle for me. And I'm still lousy at it, but I think I'm starting to kind of get the idea. Sometimes I liken it to developing our conscience. In many ways, it's similar to our conscience. So all throughout our life, we're constantly faced with moral choices, usually really little ones, right? And if we do what we know at the time to be right, then that strengthens our conscience. Our conscience grows. We become more connected to it, right? If we do what we know in the moment to be the wrong thing to do, then that kills our conscience a little bit. It's like taking, if you can imagine our connection to our soul or our spirit or to God as being like a big rope, right? And every time we do what we know to be wrong instead of what we know to be right, even little things, right? Going along with somebody in the group is picking on some other kid, and you just go along. You don't do anything. You don't speak up against it, right? You take a knife and you're cutting one of those little threads in the big rope. And every time you do that, you're cutting another little thread. And that connection to our conscience, that connection to the Spirit of God within us, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and it's harder and harder to hear. And if we keep doing that over a period of many, many years, we eventually have no conscience at all. But if on the other hand, we do what we know to be right, it's like we're strengthening that cord all the time. We're adding another little thread to the rope that connects us to the Spirit of God within and to our own conscience. And so it's those things when we get those little impulses. I used this example in an interview that I did just a short while ago. For the last quite a few years, I've been living in a trailer, and I'm what's politely called a digital nomad. And you have a little propane bottle that runs the propane heater, and it's been bloody cold up here in Alberta in the last part of April. I think spring has finally come, but there's still some piles of snow here and there on the ground. Well, it was a cold night, and the thought occurred to me, you should put a fresh propane bottle on because that one's been on a while and it might run out during the night. And then I thought to myself, I don't want to do that. It's cold outside. It's uncomfortable. Yeah, it'll probably be okay. And I got the little electric heater as a backup anyway. No problem. I went to bed. Well, in the middle of the night, I woke up and it was freezing cold in the trailer. For some reason, the electric one wasn't working and the gas had gone out. So then in the middle of the night, interrupting my sleep, when it's even colder, then I had to go outside in my pajamas and replace the propane bottle. And I thought, man, and then I realized then at that moment, right, I thought, that was God or my angels or my spirit guides or whatever. That was the divine telling me, Donald, change the propane tank now. You'll be glad you did. And I ignored it. Right? Just a little thing. So all of these little nudges we get from God, that the more we ignore them, the more we cut that connection. We can't hear that voice. The more we follow that, the stronger it gets, and the more we're able to hear that voice of God. That's been my experience and my understanding. What do you think of that, Tony?
No, that's exactly. And part of what I teach people is to keep track. Like at the end of every day, what messages did I get that I followed and that I
That's
didn't?
a
And
good
what happened?
idea.
And, and start noticing how often, said it gets cut off. The inner compass is never cut off. It's just you stop listening to it. That's the difference. Our conscious, if you will, our inner compass is always speaking. It's that we have dulled it. Sometimes we've dulled it for years, but it can be brought back to life very easily. No, I take that back. It's not very easy, but by
It can
practice,
be.
as
Yeah,
a practice, there's a practice that I do every day that I would love to teach your audience right now because it's
sure.
it's been the most profound, and it's called the 7-minute presence practice. Most people tell you to meditate 20 minutes to an hour. I was taught to meditate for 7 minutes. So anybody can do this. And it's to take 2 minutes to focus on not just your breath but the sensations in your body. And the reason we do that is because the body is the only place we can be fully in the present moment. The minds can be 100 miles away.
Yeah,
The mind can be, and the heart can be, the emotions can be all over the place in the past, in the future. But the body is always present. So you spend 2 minutes not judging, not analyzing, just experiencing it. And then when you do that, it opens up this feeling of, this feels good. I like this. And that's your heart speaking. And your heart starts saying, okay, I'm happy to be here. I'm glad. I'm grateful. And your heart starts appreciating the present moment. And so you can open up to 2 minutes of noticing what's going on in your heart. And then when you do both of those things, it quiets your mind. The chatter may be there, but there's lots of space in the chatter, if you will. And so you can start noticing possibility and vision and ideas and, all kinds of wonderful what can be beyond what you ever thought before. That mind of God, if you will, you get connected. And then you take, so 2 minutes in the body, 2 minutes in the heart, 2 minutes in the head, and then 1 minute to remember they all go together and to recognize that we are just one and to feel that connection with our body. I love teaching that practice. I do it every single day right after coffee in the morning.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. You know what? I have never heard that expressed so succinctly. And I think that's very beautiful. I'm going to try that.
Well, I didn't make it up. I got it from a man named Russ Hudson, who is one of my profound Enneagram teachers. He's probably the foremost Enneagram teacher in the world, and he's incredible. He comes from the depth of the spiritual basis of the Enneagram, and I studied with him for 14 months and was certified by him in the Enneagram for conscious living. And his main thing is it's not about figuring out what your type is and how to deal with other types. That's part of it. But what it's about is learning to live in presence. I mean, that's
Right.
really what we're here for. That's what the inner compass is about. It's living in presence. I'm in the middle of creating a new course, and the whole first chapter of the course is all about coming to presence. And, to me, that's the essence of what spirituality is about. Every spiritual teacher tells you about living in the moment. And this is just a practical way of doing that. And it's just been amazing. And what it does for me when I start my day that way, I'm reminded during the day. When I forget, I don't have to do 7 full minutes, but I can just remember to breathe and feel my sensations, and I'm right back there. It's profound. And that is what I suggest to people to do rather than try to remember to think about, where is it coming from? What's going on? When you do that practice, it kind of trains you to live in that moment and to listen to that voice that wants to tell us that it loves us.
Right. That's beautiful. Well, that's great. Toni, so can you tell us, before we close up, can you let everybody know what kind of work you're doing now and how people can reach you?
Okay, the easiest thing to do is go to ToniLaMotta.com, and that's my website, and it's TONI, I'm a woman, LAMOTTA.com. And on it, on the very first page, I give 2 options. If the word Enneagram is foreign and you don't know it, click on that link and I send a free course to learn the Enneagram as a foundation. If you do know it, I lead people into a series of learning to listen to their inner compass, ultimately bringing people, and I have a couple of books on the subject. I have a number of things that it will guide people, and I give away a lot of free stuff too. And then one of them is like, how is your inner compass being hijacked right now? So can you learn that? Eventually, when somebody really seriously wants to work with me, I have a 6-month program where we do both coaching and they get all of the courses that I teach. And then we do private coaching as well and group coaching. So just go to the website. It has it all right there. And I'm watching people every day coming and join my tribe. And it's exciting to know that the world can transform. I have no illusions of grandeur, but if one person can be helped, okay.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll put your website address in the show notes as well, so that people can click on that and find you. And that sounds delightful. Toni, it's been a joy and an honor to chat with you today, and I'm sure that your words of advice and wisdom will be enlightening for those who listen as well. Thank you very much, and God bless you on your journey.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.